So this is just a revision for designing and surveying. We are not going to do any, I'll try to do as much cases as possible. Let's try to do 15 minutes and 15 minutes. So this is class 4. So designing goes as, number 1, you need to identify, is it fulcrum or non-fulcrum? So this is a non-fulcrum because it's a short span class 4. If I had those missing, okay, then all this space will be a long span. So it will be a fulcrum case. So class 4 in long span is a fulcrum case. Class 4 in short span is a non-fulcrum case. So this is the first thing you need to establish in designing. Then design step number 1 is the saddle. What saddles here? How many saddles? We have one edentulous space. We have one saddle, and definitely we want to restore it. So I am going to get my red pencil and I'm going to draw my saddle. So it goes by drawing the mesh in this area. Okay, and I am, maybe it's not that clear, like I drew a mesh in this area. Then I will consider it at the tooth bonded RPD. So tooth bonded RPD, after a saddle, you need to, after saddle, in any rule, in any RPD, you need to put guide planes. Guide planes goes that next to each edentulous place, you need to put on each surface one guide plane. So one here and one here. So in this case, I have 2 guide planes, one here, because this is the edentulous area, and you need to put next surface to it, each a guide plane. So saddle, guide plane, guide plane. Then you need to put rests, which is the element of support. Then in rest or element of support, you need, here it is tooth bonded and it is non-fulcrum. So basically the rule goes same like class 3. The rule goes as you need to put the rest next to the edentulous. So next to is here, which is mesial, and here next to is mesial. So one rest here and one rest there. Then, so saddle, guide plane, rest, which are your support. Then you will need to have minimum of 3 to 4 rests in every design. So in this case, I have one here. I will need to have 2 more, and it's preferable to be far from each other to give me the tripod or quadrupod effect. So in this case, I will need to put one. Maybe I'm not going to put anything on the 8. 8 is a weak tooth, non-reliable. Maybe here, which is mesial of the 7 on both sides. So again, saddle, guide plane, rest, more rest because I need at least 4 rests. And then after that, I need retention. Retention is first direct retainer, second is indirect retainer. So the direct retainer, which is clasps, the rule is you need 1 clasp for each side minimum. You want to add more, it's fine. So here it's an upper in the maxilla. It's an upper. They are very, they can be very unsightly, not aesthetic to place on the canine. So you can just shift them and put clasps at the back. Since here it's a tooth bonded situation, then you can put for example, a C clasp, any strong clasp like a C clasp, or even something strong. Since you're putting only 1 clasp, you can make it even fancier and have an embrasure clasp. You need to know your clasps. So again, saddle, guide plane, rest, which is next to, and then another 2 rests, which will also work as the part of your direct retainer. Then indirect retainer. This is a non-fulcrum case because it's a short span, so there is no indirect retainer, I will skip this phase, step. The last step, sorry, this is not a maxilla mandible. Then the last step here would be the major connector. Major connector, here you have a lot of room, so I can just do an eye at the lingual bar, and I draw it, and then I connect with a minor connector. Let's go with an easier situation. Let's go with a class 1. Class 1. Distal extension on both sides. So the first thing, I need to draw how many saddles I have? 2. So I have to draw one here, one here. How is it a fulcrum case? Absolutely. Fulcrum cases, again, class 1, class 2, long span, class 4. This is class 1, definitely fulcrum case. So I have to draw the saddle on both sides. Then I need part of the saddle. Step number 2 in design, guide plates. Guide plates, I need to draw them next to, on each side of the edentulous area. So here I have 2 guide planes, one here and one here. 2 guide planes. Then step number 3. So saddle, guide plane, step number 3 is rest. So the rest is, this situation is a distal end and this situation is a distal end. So the rule is I need to put the rest away from. So you have 2 rules for rest, primary rest or support. If you have a distal extension, you put the rest on the side of on the tooth next to the edentulous space, but on which side? If it's a distal extension, you need to put it away, on the side away from the edentulous area. So here, it's the side away is the mesial side. Since it's a premolar, then it's an occlusal mesial rest. On the other side here, again, it's a distal extension. So I have to put the rest away, on the side away from the distal extension. Again, it's a mesial rest. So again, saddle, saddle, guide plane, rest, rest. Okay. Then I will have to do direct retention. Retention first is direct retainer, indirect retainer. Let's start with the first one. Direct retainer. This is a distal extension situation. So you have to have a class, minimum 1 clasp on each side. So you have to have a stress breaking clasp. Because it's a distal extension, you have to put either a RPI, RPA, or a combination clasp. So these are the rules for distal extension. The type of the clasp goes as it has to be stress breaker. So it has to be an RPI, RPA, or a combination clasp. Let's say I'm going to draw it as a RPI and another RPI. And I can see here I have a lot of sulcus space and I don't have a frenum on both sides. So it will work very well. Okay, I drew my saddle, guide planes, support now, and retention, direct retainer now, indirect retainer. The first question I have to ask, do I need indirect retainer? Absolutely, because the distal end. Where to put the direct retainer? So I drew rest here, rest here. So I need to make an imaginary line connecting the 2 rests, and that's called the fulcrum line. From there, I go perpendicular and as far as possible from there. And in order to put my indirect retainer, what's an indirect retainer? It's the rest that you put it on the other side in order to prevent the denture from going away when the food is sticky and moving the teeth from the other side this way. So you don't want it to flip this way. So you put a rest on that side to prevent it to flip. So I cannot put it, the furthest tooth here is a lateral. So I cannot put it, sorry, central incisors. So I cannot put it on central. I go to the next one. They are lateral. Again, poor abutments for rest. So the next ones would be canines. So I can put rest on the canine. The name of the rest that you put on the canine are cingulum rest. So I'll put one cingulum rest here, one cingulum rest, because you need for each edentulous area one cingulum or indirect retainer. Again, saddle, saddle, guide plane, indirect, support, indirect retainer, before that, direct retainer, and finally, indirect retainer, and finally, you need to put your major connector. Now, how do you choose the major connector? This is a mandible, so you need to measure from the gingival margin here to the sulcus. Why? Because the most preferable major connector in the lower arch would be a lingual bar. If you have the space from here to here of 7 millimeter or more, then you are happy to have a lingual bar. And it is very clear that I have more, so that's why I drew here a lingual bar. If you don't have the space or any of the front teeth are weak, then you need to shift it from a lingual bar to a lingual plate. Then you drew your major connector. You just need to connect all the rest with a minor connector. And this is the final form of, or final drawing of your design, which we call it the primary design. Once we put it on the surveyor in a minute, then we can confirm the design. One more design, and then we can start surveying. Okay, I think this is more useful for you. We repeated it in the previous session. So this is a class 2, division 1, class 2, division 1, because it's a mixed scenario. Now you will see why. So class 2, division 1, the first thing in designing, you have to draw the saddle. So I drew the saddle here. I have 2 saddles, 1, 2. So I draw 1 saddle here and 1 saddle here. Then I need to make the guide planes. How many guide planes I need here? 1, 2, 3. How did I determine there are 3? It's the surface next to each surface, proximal surface next to each edentulous area. Here I have 1 proximal surface next to this edentulous area. And here next to edentulous area, I have 2 surfaces, which is the distal of this and the mesial of that. So again, I have 1, 2, 3 guide plates. Again, I drew my saddle. I drew my 3 guide planes, then plates. Then I have to draw. Step number 3 is the support. Support is the element that push everything downward and prevent it from going down. The most important element of support would be the rest. So here, where I am gonna draw the rest, I have 2 different sides with 2 different scenarios. This side is tooth and tissue supported. Here it is tooth supported because it's bounded both sides by a teeth. So in this side, it's the same like the previous one. The rule goes as you need to put the rest on the side away from the edentulous area, which is in this case is a mesial rest. And because it is a premolar, I'm gonna draw a mesial occlusal rest. On the other side, the rule goes, because it's tooth bonded, then it has to be next to. So what's the surface next to this tooth from the edentulous area? It's the distal, and here the one next to would be mesial. Then, so I have 1, 2, 3. It's a very nice tripod class situation, so I don't need any more rests. Then I need, so saddle, saddle, guide plane, guide plane, guide plane, rest away from, rest next to, rest next to. I finish my support. The next would be retention. First is direct retainer. Direct retainer. This side is tooth and tissue supported, so I have only 3 main options: RPI, RPA, or a combination class. I have good room. It's a premolar. It could be aesthetic, but it's because it's a premolar, 1 root. It's better to put a gentle class. So an I-bar would be a gentle class. a safe selection would be an I-bar. This side is a different situation. It's a situation of tooth bonded. I can put wherever clasp I want. Let's say I will put an I-bar here. I can put a C clasp. You can tell me, Doctora, these are 3 clasps. Yes, you can put 3, but the minimum is 2. So again, saddle, saddle, guide plane, guide plane, guide plane. Then support with the 3 rests. 4 is your retention. 1 clasp, 1 clasp, 1 clasp. Once we put it on the surveyor, you will see that can I approve those clasps or I need to change them? We will put this one actually on the surveyor now. Then after the direct retainer, let's continue with the design, goes the indirect retainer. I ask myself, does this case require indirect retainer? Absolutely, it requires, because there is a distal extension, because it's a class 2. How do I determine the last 2 or the most distal or the most posterior rest, which is on this side, this one, and on this side is that one? I put my imaginary line, which we call it a fulcrum line as such, and then you have to, perpendicular to it, determine the most furthest tooth to that line, which is in this case, it's this tooth, which is a lateral incisor, weak abutment. Let's go to the next stronger one, which is a canine. A canine, I will put on it an indirect retainer. Indirect retainer goes in the form of usually a rest. Since it's a canine, I will put a cingulum rest, and that's my indirect retainer. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, even better arrangement of rest. So that's very nice. Then the last one goes by the major connector. This is a lingual, it's a lower. I need to measure between the gingival margin here and the fold of the tongue in the lingual sulcus. It's very obvious here. It's less than 7. Because if it's less than 7 millimeters, I have to place a plate, lingual plate, not a lingual bar. So I do a plate and then I connect everything with a minor connector, and this is the final design. So let's put this one on the surveyor now. So everyone asked me, Doctora, we don't understand surveying. So now you will understand it. Once you do it once, you will understand it. So this is the surveyor. This basically moves right and left, so you can maneuver to, once you put the cast here, you can move it, because this does not move right and left, but it moves in vertical. This moves up and down, but this can move in any direction. So you move the cast all around to draw, to check anything. Then this table, you can tilt it in any direction. So I put the cast first, and I attach on the surveyor this, what we call it, the analysis rod or stylus. And I put it here. And then I attach my cast using this knot, but it attaches it only to but it's still not locked. It's attached to this so it doesn't fall, but it's still movable, because here there is a hinge and it can move in any direction, any tilt. So basically here, I need to start surveying. Step 1, I need to put it in what we call a 0 tilt. Okay, 0 tilt means that you need to put the occlusal plane, not the lower cast, but the occlusal plane, okay, which is the surface touching all the teeth, all the teeth. You need to put it parallel to this or perpendicular to that. Perpendicular to, saying that something is perpendicular to this is the same as saying that it is parallel to this. It's another way of saying the same thing. So I want this to be parallel to this. So an easier way of doing it is just to put anything on top of and touching all of the occlusal planes to as much as possible. Yeah, like that. So it's touching as much as possible of the teeth. In this case, we have a lot, an extensive curve of spree, so they are not touching, and we have a little bit of gypsum in the middle of the cast. But let's assume that this is touching most of the teeth. So you keep maneuvering until you see that this, because it's touching the occlusal plane, is parallel to this. So let's say I'm happy with this tilt. So I lock it by this knot. If you can see it, hold on. So this is parallel. So I'm gonna lock the tilt using this knot. And we call this the zero tilt. Why? Because here, occlusal plane is parallel to this. This is my zero tilt. Then, at the zero tilt, I examine. So this is step number 1, zero tilt. Step number 2, I examine the proximal surfaces, the proximal undercuts. So proximal, proximal, proximal. What do we have in the proximal areas? Guide plane. So basically, step number 2 in surveying is to examine the undercuts for guide plates. How can I do that? Now, look carefully here. Maybe if I tilt it this way, yeah, I think this is a good. Yeah. So this here, you can see that I have, maybe this is, we don't have a big undercut, so maybe you cannot see. Look here. You can see there is a small triangle forming here between the rod and underneath the area touching the tooth. This area here is called an undercut. You see it? This area here is called the proximal undercut. This is an area where we put a guide planes. So here you can see that I have zero undercut next to the premolar, and I have a massive undercut, not massive, but moderately big undercut next to the molar. Let's look. So in this case, we have 3 guide planes, 1, 2, 3. I need to examine the 3 of them. We said on the premolar, there is no undercut, moderate undercut, and the next premolar on the other side, which is my 3rd, I have no undercut. So the purpose of the second step in surveying is to make the 3 of them as equal as possible. So I have bigs, no, no. So it's not fair on this. If I have to prepare a guide plane, I have to cut a good part of this tooth. I will need to cut nearly this much of the tooth to make it parallel. Look, to make it parallel, I have to chop away all this part. So it's not fair. So I'm gonna just scrub that out. So what I need to do, I need to do a tilt. Doctora, what kind of a tilt I need to do? It has to be on the anterior-posterior tilt. Now look carefully. I am gonna now deviate. Look at this tilt. Look at the undercut. Observe it, please. Can you hold here? Now observe this tilt very well. I am gonna move the cast right and left, not forward, backward. Please look carefully. I am moving the cast right. And I am moving the cast. Sorry, it's the whole computer and the thing is moving. So I moved it also to the left. لحظة. Zero tilt. So this is look carefully. This is right tilt. and this is left tilt. Right tilt, right side tilt, left tilt. There is no change in the undercut. Tamam? But look now, what will happen when I do forward tilt. Look, the undercut becomes bigger. But when I do Mizi backward tilt, the undercut disappears. I'll do it again. If it's not clear, خليني أجي أقرب. Put it this way. أيوة امسكها كده. Again, this is the initial undercut. Okay, لحظة. Yeah, this is the initial undercut. When I go, observe as I go, this tilt the undercut disappeared. When I go, this tilt the undercut becomes worse. Again, let's look at the other premolar. When I put it at a 0 tilt, you can see, sorry, we're having some technical difficulty in holding the surveyor and the computer, but let's see here. Might be clearer to see. So this is at the 0 tilt. There is absolutely no undercut. As I am doing it as a posterior tilt, ما ظاهر في الكمبيوتر. Okay, let me hold the cast in my hand. Look. This here, I have a severe posterior tilt. You can see the undercut. Observe as I move the cast in a posterior tilt. The undercut disappeared. In another word, by moving, look, by moving the cast in anterior-posterior tilt, what happens? By moving the cast, look, this is a posterior tilt, big undercut with an posterior tilt, big undercut, anterior tilt, small undercut. In another word, doing forward, backward movement will change for me the proximal undercut. So again, 0 tilt at is how you start surveying, 0 tilt at, which is parallel to the surveyor. Then you need to analyze all the proximal surfaces. We notice in this situation that this is very big undercut, no undercut, small undercut. So I will do a small tilt until they are equal. In this situation, I made a small tilt. Here I have small undercut, and here small undercut. So the whole point of step 2 is to make all of the undercut sums equal to each other. So I will remove equally from all teeth. In the beginning, I started up with big undercut proximally, no undercut. I made a small anterior-posterior in the posterior direction tilt. And now I have small undercut here, small undercut here, small undercut there. I am happy with the anterior-posterior tilt. Then the next one is I have to check the undercuts for the clasp. So number 1 is at 0 tilt. 2 is the undercut for the proximal. 3, which is you need to check the undercut for your clasp. So I will start drawing here and draw here my survey line at this tilt. So you can see here that the survey line, which is black, okay? And the I bar, you can see that the I bar is above or at the survey line. For an I bar, the situation, you have to have the I bar below the survey line. So in this case, I will go and write, this case needs a composite addition or a dimple or a surveyed crown. But the easiest way is to add composite or change the tilt. But I don't want to change my tilt. I'm happy with my tilt. Then on the other side here, I have a situation, again, very similar. The I bar is at the survey line. The tip of the I bar is at the survey line. So in this situation, I will just add composite. Very easy fix. In this case, so I will make a tick for this situation for my I bar, tick for my situation for my I bar. So 1, 2 I bars, I'm happy with them. I can call it a day, finish surveying. If I want to add a third class, you can, it's optional. Let's just do it for fun. So this is a molar. Lower molars, we said earlier, let's put on it a C clasp. So the C clasp, as you can see here, has a very unfavorable contours compared to the survey lines. All lower molars, when you have an extraction next to them, they tend to mesially tip to the side. So you will always find you have no buccal undercut. The survey line is very low. And you will always, nearly always, find that you have a undercut on the lingo mesial. So a very easy fix in this situation is to change it from a C clasp to a ring clasp. And in this case, here, to accept my design, I put a composite addition. To accept my design, composite addition. To accept my design, I changed it to a ring clasp. And then this will be called my final modified design. I am happy with it. The rest elements don't change with surveying. I am happy with everything. I do the final step, which is called tripoding, which is locking this accepted path of insertion. So I put back my analysis broad, and I do 3 far from each other lines as such. This is called tripoding, because once I finished, sorry, it keeps slipping. Once I finished as such, and I want to remove it, now it's wobbly. I want to put it back to the survey line. All what I need to do to the same path of insertion, I need to align it to one of them. Then I keep moving and change and make sure that they are, all 3 lines are parallel to the analysis rod. Once they are all parallel to the analysis rod, I know that I am back to my path of insertion. And now I finished surveying and I confirmed my design of my RPD. I hope you understand it. That will get you through to the basics of designing, which most of you struggle with. And it's an important fundamental part of your exam. Studying the designing and surveying of RPD. Yalla, good luck. Bye-bye.